Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome all those present here physically and online. This is the new edition of the Energy Transition Seminar Series. Today, we will take a closer look at a dimension of the energy transition that is not primarily technological, but communicative and political. Our seminar is titled Polarized by Headlines, How Media Shapes Energy and Politics. So the energy transition is not only about innovation and engineering, it is also about how stories are told. Media coverage often amplifies ideological divides, highlights conflicts, and uses emotionally charged language that can strongly influence how energy solutions are understood, supported, or resisted. We are delighted to have two excellent speakers today here who will guide us through this exciting topic. It's, first of all, Dr. Elena Baro and Professor Stefan Geiss. And for those who have not met us before, I'm Benjamin Mitterutzner. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Industrial Economics and Technology Management, and I'm joined by Amber Northam, who is postdoctoral fellow at the Department for Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture. And together we will guide you through today's discussion with Martin, providing essential support behind the scenes. Thank you all for being here, and let's get started.
So our first speaker today is Professor Stefan Geiss from the Department of Sociology and Political Science. His research focuses on media effects, public opinion, and the interplay between journalism and political processes. He will help us understand how energy technologies are framed in the media and how these framings matter. Our second speaker, Dr. Elena Baro, a researcher in political science at the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture, same department as me. She studies how public opinion related to dynamics shapes support for or opposition to climate policies. Her work helps us see how narratives in the media influence not just individuals, but political decision-making itself.
So we will first listen to the two presentations back to back. After that, we will invite both speakers to join us at our plenary discussion. For the Q&A today, we encourage you in the audience to actively raise your hand in order to join the discussion with our speakers. And for those, all of you online through Teams, please use the raise hand function if you have any question. We will then bring you up on the screen so you can ask your question directly to the speakers and join the conversation in real time.
Yeah, so this is something we're trying out, and we want to make sure that the online crowd has ample chance to participate in the discussion as well. So please don't be shy and raise your hand if you've got a question. We encourage you to participate.
And after the discussion, we have this tradition, we will stick to pizza. So please stay here, mingle, and use the opportunity to connect across departments and different sectors.
Thanks. And with that, we'll begin. So I'll invite Stefan up to the stage, and the floor is yours.
Hi. Okay, welcome to this presentation. I'm trying to give a brief overview over structures and dynamics in the energy debate in Norway, which, however, requires a little bit of an excursus into basics of public opinion formation and the structure of the public sphere. So I want to put a few theses out there up front that I will try to supplant by by evidence and good arguments. So first thesis is that the public sphere's dynamic lets minority resistance usually appear oversized. So that's not a specific phenomenon we see with energy policy only, but it's a more general mechanism, and we'll shed some light on how that comes. The recent changes in the information environment amplify these changes or these oversized appearances, particularly social media. By that, we could say there's something like an implicit veto right that even a relatively small group can usually bring in, not by politically blocking a procedure, but by just signaling enough resistance that it's a too hot iron to touch. So this usually sends societies towards a pathway where you always have to make sure to give the appearance that the pathway chosen is compatible with the status quo and iteratively developing based on the status quo rather than having any revolutionary things. Everything else, and that's what we've probably been seeing in the last few years, is a threat of polarization, backlash, and for political actors, it can amount to something like political suicide to engage directly in such hot topics. So let's have a short look at the structures of the public sphere in general and the energy debate. In general, what I would choose as the main metaphor here is we can imagine the public sphere as an arena, a very multifaceted arena with tons of different actors, but we have a large audience looking on to what's happening, and we have a small set of protagonists that get the attention of everyone, whose arguments are in the spotlight and who are driving the discourse. On the what is going on, please. Yeah. And what's happening from the media side is that usually it's not political motives that are guiding the decisions. The power of journalism doesn't lie directly in intervening into these debates, but in the selective power. And the selective power is not unlimited. So you always have to select who gets to speak, which issues get attention. You have to always choose that in line with audience expectations and towards maximizing the audience in order to maintain economic sustainability. That, to varying degrees, can have two major outcomes: a focus on virality, sensationalism, newsworthiness on the one hand, so the more sensationalist trait, and the reliance on authenticity and trustworthiness. So these are the two major capitals. We have awakening attention on the one hand and having kind of the role as a narrator of real world events on the other hand. So always maintaining the balance between credibility and sensationalism, and different media or different actors in this arena make different choices. So if I have a lot of credibility, then I will probably maintain that credibility, whereas others can only get forward by raising attention, not paying as much attention to credibility. So that's also where spreading fake news can come in, but it's only, like, I would say that's probably not the main problem here, because there is a lot of actors out there who have to monitor their reputation. It's more like something that where the audience, the fierce competition pushes the limits of what's possible. So that works iteratively. So our standards as to what constitutes credible sources of information may also iteratively change. Good. Then we have the players on the field, which are not just randomly picked actors of some sort, but social protagonists, people who are in power. That's not because journalists are so keen on power, but again, it's about the audience, right? We want to know about the people who make the decisions. I don't really care in my everyday on what some random person on the street thinks. That can have some narrative function in the news as well, but usually it is that we focus on the actors that drive the action, who make the events, who have the power to change something. It's natural to follow through on them. So this is inherently not democratic, or so it is market driven. Not everybody has the right to be in the media with their arguments. Right? And in the energy debates, this can be the politicians making the decisions. It can be the experts that don't have formal power, but informational power. And of course, it is economic actors and activist groups who also can have some legitimacy of entering the discourse because they claim to speak for instance, for the people immediately affected by, say, a wind park that's being built. Okay. Good. And then we have the audience and its different segments, but I talked already about how the audience constrains what journalists can decide, what news media will implement in their procedures, and what kinds of games the protagonists play, both to be present in the media, which is important for their success, but also to engage in the political processes behind the doors. Good. And then we have a degree of dynamics involved in the entire process. So it's not just that we know the constellation of actors beforehand and can from that calculate how a specific issue will turn out, who's winning and who's losing. There is a lot of path dependency included in the process. And one thing I want to point out as a mechanism that we probably are not aware of enough is the perceptual influence of who is winning and who is not winning. Who is in the majority or in the minority? You probably recognize from media coverage that you yourself are using that there's the diversity of actors who always claim that they are silenced, they don't get to speak their mind, and they come from all sides, right? It's not just, for instance, wind energy opposition movements that claim that, but also the developers will claim that, the experts will claim that, and so on. So it is a quite prevalent phenomenon. And if it's not this bias, it's other kinds of biases that the media are accused of. Everybody seems to be of the opinion that they are the ones who are in the true majority, even if that's not measurable by public opinion polling. Right? They would say that's just because people don't know enough. That's just because they are not engaged enough or so. So there's a lot of perceptions involved in that. We've therefore also seen that it's become a hot topic, this energy debate in Norway, particularly when it comes to expanding the energy supply that we have, and because it is really hot iron to touch, we haven't seen a lot on, say, wind energy expansion in the present election debate or the recently passed election debates. And one concept I would like to highlight here is the spiral of silence, a theory of public opinion formation that treats exactly this discourse on who is in the majority, who's in the minority, and how that affects who wins out in such a discourse. What it points out is that this perception is not just some meaningless perceptual feature, but it's a major driver in how the camps develop. And that is because humans have an inherent urge to align with the stronger, the winning out camp. So it would say this doesn't just affect who people think are winning, but also who's really winning. And it's very easy to evoke false impressions of which side is how strong or how the different camps are developing. And that's precisely because of the mechanisms I pointed out, that the media are not representing the distribution of opinions. They are representing what's going on in the arena between the protagonists, right? And so they are selective, and not selective as a public opinion poll, but selective in what's interesting. And that's, of course, the most negative and probably the most positive, the most sensational things, because credibility doesn't play a large role as long as you make statements as to what you wish for, right? So that's more about statements of fact. Yes, so one major term we should be aware of here is the so-called climate of opinion. The mass media and the social media can easily evoke the impression that the climate of opinion is going in one direction, whereas it really is going in another direction. And that's exactly what we also found in terms of the wind energy debate in Norway in a survey study that was in the field in 2022. So first of all, we asked a good deal of arguments in favor and against wind power, and how much people endorsed these arguments. And what we saw is that there was a good deal of greater acceptance of anti-wind power arguments. But at the same time, we do see sorry, I have to go forward. We see that the distributions of whether you are in favor of against wind energy were quite opposed. People tended to be in favor of wind energy, that's the green camp, rather than opposed to it. While they, so that's both now and initially, so we measured that at two different points in time, they were more in favor, and actually over time became more in favor of wind energy. Yet, sorry, that somewhere else. Actual and perceived opinion, please. Sorry for that. But what we see is that people think wind energy, anti-wind energy, is more prevalent in the media. It is more popular among, or it's more widespread in the population, and particular at the locale where you are currently placed. So people seem to overestimate quite a lot the anti-wind energy camp, and we suspect this is because they are a relatively loud camp, and seemingly, according to these data, a loud minority that is, however, driving the discourse and dominating the discourse, as they are a legitimate player in the game. So this is one of the perceptual biases that can occur as public opinion is being formed in and against the background of what the media are covering. And my thesis is that social media amplify these trends, because one common misconception is that social media don't necessarily have a democratizing effect on public discourse. That's what many scholars hoped for in the beginning, but what we've seen is that it creates an even more intense and fierce competition over attention, and everybody can voice their opinion, certainly, but nobody has the right to get heard. And those who get heard, who get the attention and draw the attention, those are still the powerful, the established elites that would also dominate the media, and those that dare to come with provocative messages, with disrupting discourse, and other things that are, how should you say, that target the sensationalist part and the virality part of the public sphere, and not so much the credibility part, because there the established actors have an inherent advantage. I mean, if I'm a top politician, I have big apparatus of my party, of the ministries I'm heading, whatsoever behind me that can feed any kinds of facts that I need for my argumentation into me. And most other people don't have that at their avail. So there is just this inherent imbalance. Good. What we also asked about, in this case, wind energy, but I guess that's the energy debate more broadly, is how hot the issue was being viewed by people. So is it easy to talk about wind energy, or is it something where you would be really cautious? And we mapped it against a few other issues, some of which we thought they are easy to talk about in Norway. So what do we do with the oil fund? How about taxes? That's probably not true anymore. But a hot topic at the time was immigration. So that was up here. And what we saw was that people who are positive towards wind power, they think wind power is up there with immigration, roughly speaking, right? So it's not really up there, but it's going in that direction. Whereas the people who are against wind power think, no, it's more like taxes, the oil fund. I can rant about that, right? It's not a big thing to speak your mind about. It's to say basically that you are against wind power. It's not as risky, socially speaking. Can you go to the moral loading? Yes. So this chart is about to what degree respondents thought that this is a moral question, whether to expand wind energy in Norway, where it's saying, yeah, it's more like a technical question on the surface level. But people felt that this is quite a moral thing. It is appraised on moral dimensions and not on technical or economic dimensions only. I mean, that would be the obvious alternative. And that means that other considerations suddenly come into the debate that we probably think shouldn't necessarily dominate our opinion formation. Can you go to the hostility and speaking out chart? Yeah. And we see the same with the felt climate of opinion. So more to the right would be a more hostile climate of opinion perception. And the people who felt a hostile climate of opinion perception tended to be less willing to speak out. So in all camps, both wind energy supporters and wind energy opposition, they wouldn't dare to say out loud what they were thinking about the issue, whereas those that felt the climate of opinion is more favorable. They were not willing to speak out to the same degree. But what we see is an asymmetry. Those who are against wind power usually have a more favorable public perception of the climate of opinion than those who support wind energy, which kind of fits the general picture. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. The conclusions are basically the same thesis that I presented in the beginning. So we have mechanisms that will respond to minority opposition, even if they are relatively small oppositions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. That was super interesting, and look forward to discussing that further. So now we will invite Elena Baro up to stage. And Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, okay, thank you very much. I will now delve a bit more into the public opinion perspective, perhaps with a slightly different angle than Stefan. So I hope it fits very nicely. So generally, when we talk about public opinion related to climate change and more specifically climate policy, a problem that we face is that when it comes to opinions about the specific solutions that are needed to address climate change, the public is still quite divided. And what is more important is that this division is quite consequential, because we know that policy implementation is public support is crucial element for public policy implementation. So we often hear that the public is polarized and the public opinion is divided. Before we move on, I just wanted to briefly specify what is intended by polarization, because I think it's important to mark that polarization is a condition which is common to any democratic system, and it turns harmful when a conflict becomes so deep that people see it as unbridgeable. So then in this case, we talk about harmful polarization. And this harmful polarization is what ends up not leaving any room for dialogue or consensus or compromise. And there are some elements that can favor this harmful polarization, such as political discourses that tend to portray society as divided into opposed and homogeneous blocks, which then leads people to take sides and reduces also the possibility for this dialogue and consensus, which are quite important. So then the question is, why is this happening with climate, especially because there is quite widespread consensus on the need to address climate change, and what is pushing us to this point? And I think that before we try answering these questions, we can talk a bit generally about where opinions come from, and more specifically then about where opinions about climate come from. And first and foremost, I think it's important to mark that when individuals need to form an opinion, they don't do it by carefully gathering all the relevant informations. Quite on the contrary, they use mental shortcuts to do so. And these mental shortcuts can be their prior opinions, their prior knowledge and beliefs that they use to ground their decisions and their opinions. And these points are particularly important when it comes to climate, because climate is an issue that is complex and is also politically polarized. So what happens when an issue is complex is that individuals often lack a thorough knowledge of science and technology that allows them to assess all the risks and benefits to then form an opinion. And so what happens is that they rely more on these cues and mental shortcuts or their feelings about the topic to compensate for the lack of information. But where do specifically opinions about climate come from? And what the research shows is that there are some elements that are more influential than other in influencing opinions about climate policies. And among this, we have ideology and political views, which are key drivers of support or opposition for climate policies. And when it comes to ideology and political views, we talk about general left-right orientations, which means the preferences that individuals can have when it comes to, for instance, the role of the government versus the market in achieving a low-emission society. Another factor that is quite influential when it comes to determining opinions about climate policies is social group membership, which means that individuals tend to be positively biased toward people they know. The group they belong to can be family, can be friends, and in particularly the political groups and leaders that they like. And when it comes to this, the opposite is also very much true. So people can also form biases and opinions in opposition to a group which they don't like at all. And there is increasing evidence on the importance of this latest point. So we'll go a bit more in depth on it. So outgroups beliefs, meaning that the beliefs that we have about groups that we really don't like, are very powerful cues that individuals can use to understand and to decide what to reject, which means that if a party that we really don't like endorses a specific position, we use that piece of information to understand what to oppose or what to support. So in this case, rather than the actual content of the message or of a policy proposal, what is really influential is who is advocating that proposal. And this is specifically important because what we know is that negative evaluation have a much stronger impact than a positive one when it comes to opinion formation. So individuals tend to give much more importance to the negative than the positive one. And what we have been seeing lately is that this dynamic are becoming more and more prominent. There are, of course, other important factors that can have an influence on what determines person support or opposition for a specific policy, or how one informs their opinions on climate policies, which are less directly related to party identification and preferred political parties. And among some of these factors, we have also the type of policy proposals. For instance, we know that pool policies, which are softer policies that emphasize voluntary changes, are much more appreciated, so they tend to meet much less public resistance. On the contrary, hard push policies, such as bans, tend to be quite divisive and are not generally attractive to public opinion. And then there are other factors. For instance, at the party level, some specific political parties may actually have strategic incentives to emphasize climate change, not only as a silent issue, but also to promote positions that are very divisive and very extreme, because maybe they are challenger parties or they are smaller parties that need to carve their space into the political arena, or that are trying to gather more attention. And so they propose these more divisive positions that then also have consequences in terms of public opinion. I will now show some examples from Norway and also beyond about some of these dynamics at play. And I will start by discussing, showing a bit the power of this party dislike and also party size. And I will show you a survey statement stating that the cost of meat products should be greatly increased in order to combat climate change. And in this graph on the right side, or on this side of the screen, we have all the factors that tend to show support for the statement, while on this side of the screen, on the left side, we have the factors that tend to shape opposition to the statement. And what we see is that the most impactful predictor among those included here is that disliking the Green Party is actually the factor that has the most impact in determining opposition to this statement. And this is only one of the many examples that I selected from this study, showing that actually disliking a specific party is what is more determinant in understanding support or opposition for a different type of policy and proposals. Another example that we have been seeing is how right-wing populist parties have been discussing climate, which tackles into many also of the dynamics that I mentioned when it comes to public opinion. Because what right-wing populist parties have been doing with climate is that they have not been discussing it as a standalone policy issue, but they have been embedding it into their broader ideological frames, which means that they have been using a lot of these divisive discourses that we have seen can foment then harmful polarization. And they can do that, for instance, by portraying climate policy as an elitist project that burdens ordinary people and only benefits some in society. Or they do that by connecting climate policy to issues that have very little to do with climate, such as immigration. Which, of course, it's not a very straightforward connection, but it's a quite powerful one. We have also seen how immigration was relevant in Stefan's presentation, which means that it evokes quite strong reactions among the electorate. Or they can do it by undermining scientists and experts' statements. In line with this is also the use of political symbols that the political parties can do, which can then trigger some of these dynamics in public opinion. And this is, of course, something that happens throughout the entire political spectrum, even though I selected this picture. Because political symbols tend to rely on strong emotional responses rather than the careful cost and benefit evaluations. And these responses tend to generate this strong good, bad, like, dislike type of evaluations, which we have seen are also at the base of harmful polarization. And what is more relevant is that if the symbols are connected, so like I mentioned in the case of immigration, then people tend to transfer this evaluation from one symbol to the other. So even though there isn't a straightforward connection between climate policy and immigration or other things, then they tend to still associate this. And another example, of course, it can be the association between electric vehicles and the urban centrism dimension, or electric vehicles as a symbol of a rich elite privilege. So after we have talked about this, the question may be spontaneous on if it's possible in any way to meet in the middle, and if it's possible to talk about depolarization. And what we can say is that overall polarization also tends to evolve in cycles. We see often periods of polarization and depolarization, and we also see polarization as moving between different topics. So now we have topics that are much more polarized than they used to be 10 years ago, for instance. What can happen? Sadly, this research is done from very extreme cases. It's based on very extreme cases, but what can happen is that very deep crises or very extreme cases of polarization can end up in opening opportunities for constructive change. And usually this constructive change can be achieved by moving the attention from the very extreme polarized debate to the building of coalitions around shared principles such as fairness, democracy, or future prosperity, or broader inclusive goals that can bring people together instead of dividing them, and instead of targeting personal, partisan, or identity rivalries. And then finally, on a personal level, what research seems to show is that the way to try and tone down this polarization is try to seek exposure to other perspectives, personal stories, and shared fears. So try to engage and understand what may be behind some of the more extreme or some of the opinions and positions that may be very far away from our own. So this is what may help at the individual level. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Elena, for this excellent presentation. I had the impression of both speakers; they could speak on and on. But we invite you now to the Q&A session here on stage. So please raise your hand if you have any questions. And we also collect the questions. If there are any questions online, please raise your hand and we will come back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much both for the really interesting presentations. It was nice to get this like broader perspective of what's going on in the media and then to kind of zoom in and understand like how these opinions are playing out individually. And yeah, so is there right off the bat, is there any questions that people are wanting to ask? And just raise your hand and we'll pass you a mic. But if there's no immediate questions, I can start off. So Elena, on your last slide, you suggested these different ways of dealing with some of this polarization. And I was just curious, and this is to both of you, if there's any examples of this happening that you can speak of.
As I mentioned, the studies that I referred to come from very extreme examples of elite democracies. When it comes to more established democracy, we don't have examples yet because the only official case which is affected by strong forms of harmful polarization at the moment is the US case. So we are still seeing how these things may evolve. So we will see, I guess, in the future. But I mean, there are, of course, many depolarizing initiatives, but I think that there are so many dynamics at play that it's very difficult at the moment to pinpoint the successful cases on a large scale.
Stefan?
If we look a bit back in history and around Europe, there have actually been a few cases where societies, particularly after World War II, had to implement even a political system approach to manage some of the very strong polarizations that they had. So one example would be Switzerland and Austria and also the Netherlands to some extent, where you had, for instance, in the Netherlands, a very strong difference between the Catholic part of the population, the Protestant part of the population, and the socialist part of the population, who even had separate schools. They had separate systems for basically everything. So people didn't have to interact on a daily basis in their everyday lives. But the politicians would sit together in all party governments very often and make up the decisions between them. So that is a way of having elite compromise despite very strong polarization. And we think one major factor as to why this changed over time in these countries was the advent of evening TV news and big TV audiences that kind of brought people more together. And now we see it diverges again with more segregated information spaces. So maybe that's a historical reference there.
Yeah. So my question is to both of you, but primarily I was inspired by Stefan's presentation about the arena. So my question is, when we come back to energy technologies, or why are, for example, just an example, nuclear energy, in some parts of Europe, is very it is very negative perceptions, like you said, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, maybe less. France, there is no rejection, what I know, but at least I see a lot of fragmentation within Europe when it comes to public opinions about the same topic. What is your thought about?
I think a big factor in acceptance of energy technologies is the current status quo in the respective countries. So that explains, for instance, the French case where just the energy system is built around nuclear power and there is very little opposition to it because it is taken for granted. We also see that in the data. That's not our own data, but internationally comparative data from the European Social Survey. But there we found in a secondary analysis that it's the dominant energy sources in a country have a popularity surplus over all the others, even if you account for all other factors that we know play a role in their popularity. So there is a hydropower gap for Norway. There is a nuclear power gap for France. There is a coal gap for Poland. Right, so each country has it, and for nuclear power, particularly, the major startup costs in building it obviously also play a big role. Like where a country that doesn't have nuclear power yet, there it's probably harder to get it started, get the support to even do that.
Elena, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, with this regard, I think that something that I also see in my home country, Italy, for instance, is that debate around nuclear has quite changed, even though the last referendum that was held on the topic, the introduction of nuclear was not accepted by the population. What we are seeing now is that far-right parties are actually instrumentalizing nuclear power as an alternative to what center-left and more progressive parties propose, so renewables. And they have been intensifying these campaigns. And since they are part of the current government in Italy, they're also trying to actually carve the road to reintroduce nuclear power in Italy, because they say that this is the actual road. It is not the ideological role of the left-wing parties proposing renewables, because they are trying to, they are creating these two blocks. So I think it is interesting to see how the same topic has also different space across different countries.
Yeah, definitely. And do we have a hand in the audience? Yeah.
Do I push? No? Okay. Is it the shaping the public sphere? Is it the topic of climate and energy that is divisive, or is it the proposed solutions that are? I'm thinking I have some background working with politics in the EU, and they're like and they're the parties were all agreeing on working on climate, but they differed a lot on what is the best solution. But when we get to the public sphere, is it perhaps a topic that is more divisive?
Question. Anyone have want to take a first? Stefan?
Following up on the status quo argument I was making, I think that plays a big role in what phase or has a big chance of producing a polarized response. So our narrative of anti-climate change measures and energy transition measures is that it's in some way revolutionary, right? So it really supposed to change how these systems work. And that doesn't necessarily mean people are all conservative, but it's much easier for these protagonists in the public sphere to develop horror scenarios around it, right? They are taking away our meat. That was the example with the polarizing effect of this proposal. They are taking away our nuclear power. They are making our electricity more expensive. They are killing the birds, right? So everything, it seems disruptive. Nobody worries about birds that go against glass walls of buildings that are already standing, but as soon as we build new ones, it's kind of a topic of discussion, right? And so I think that's a big thing if you change the status quo to a larger extent, or rhetorically emphasize that you increase the chances of these backlashes, I would say.
Elena, do you have anything to add? No? Okay. Yeah, next question.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a question for Stefan. I think it was you who talked about is the expansion of wind energy in Norway, is it an economic and business issue, or is it a moral issue? And I'm really interested in how what kind of a moral system this could be tapping into, and what specifically would that value be, where the wind energy would be a moral question rather than an economic one.
Very good question, and I think our data speak to that, because we asked, I briefly showed the slide but didn't talk a lot about it, what were the pro and anti-wind energy arguments that people thought were good arguments. And what we see, the best arguments are it's killing the birds, it's making electricity more expensive, it's dividing the communities. Like these kinds of things. And I think that is the moral dimension people attest to it. We have our local, and it impacts the landscape. That's another very important thing. And me having done research on this topic, both in Germany and in Norway, can say it's totally different stories that are being told about wind energy in the two countries. I mean, people will claim the landscape argument in Germany as well, but probably you've seen landscapes in Germany, so they are not they are not comparable with Norwegian landscapes, and untouched nature isn't a big thing, right? Nothing that resonates with people. So you will find these moral, these moral accesses to people's hearts and emotions. That's what you also talked about, and unlock this potential. And this is much more easy if it's going against the status quo.
Thanks. Elena, anything to add? Yeah, okay, nice. Do we have any other, let's see, just checking online. Okay, yeah, over here.
So you've been talking about the status quo quite a lot. When can you define a status quo? How long does something have to last where you can look to see that you've made a new status quo?
Yeah.
I think that's a felt status quo. As I said, it's also about the rhetorics of change. Like we like the rhetorics of change when it's still abstract, but we dislike the specifics, right? So if Obama talks about change, right, everybody's like woohoo. And as soon as you really have to say, okay, this means you will have 12 large wind farms on top of this rock, right? Then it's something else. The question when something is viewed as disruptive, I think I can't answer that directly, but it is more an impressionist thing, definitively, and it also comes down to the language and the way you present it, and how much potential it gives to any oppositions to exploit, kind of sketch scenarios that are frightening, that are inducing at least a sense of uncertainty. And to add one more thing, in policy making, you want a safe solution usually, even sowing a bit of doubt will this even be economically sustainable? Will this be bad for the environment? Will this harm tourism? Then you're a bit more conservative and saying, okay, we have a good time here already, so not change a winning community by building something, for instance. Mm.
All right. Do we have any other questions here or online? Hey.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. Elena, I was wondering, a very interesting presentation also, but do you think a little bit on the side of the individual in your analysis? And speaking purely from an anecdotal position, I seem to have this feeling that there's also a phenomena of sort of meaning collectives that are existing in society, and that it is quite often you see that if someone has opinion A, this makes it quite certain that they have opinion B, and that this isn't just party representatives, but also talking heads and people who do debates. They come from this position of a packaged solution very often, and then that means that the way that individuals form these maps of what people are thinking also correlates to that phenomena.
Absolutely, yes. I think you made a very good point, and I mean it is exactly like that. You have a lot of these associations, you have a lot of these packages of opinion that come together, and so some of the things that I mentioned when it comes to associating different symbols. So then meat becomes a symbol for something else, as many other examples as immigration. I think it's quite common to see many of these packages. So it's, I mean, of course, it's complex to capture all of them, especially in surveys. You have a limited amount of space that you can fill, but it's definitely like that.
So exactly. So I have a question to both of you. Actually, I'm finding more and more out that energy transitions are actually socio-technical transitions. So public acceptance is key. And when talking about the public acceptance, so how, and Elena pointed out this, how can we moderate ourselves in the discussion? How can we be less polarizing and more constructive and based on facts?
That's exactly the topic of a larger research project I'm involved in now. So that's trying to develop a thing called an energy policy incubator, like where you want to a priori test and make robust policy proposals with a common procedure to kind of take the polarizing potential, among other things, out of them and remove the resonance ground for this opposition. The easy question would be, you should be responsive to the concerns that the communities have. That's not always easy and possible. And one major thing is the attention often comes, or the spotlight comes on these issues when it's almost too late. Like when the planning processes come, that is very early. People can't imagine it very well. And then the construction site gets set up, and then it becomes real. And then it's mostly too late to change the business model, like involving the community in the profits. It's long gone, right? It's happened 5 years ago. So extending this time frame quite a lot of attention and focusing public attention earlier is also an important thing we consider. How could we do that?
I think, I mean, if one thinks about the bright side, what survey opinions show is that people want to solve this. There is agreement on the general principles, so those like general depolarizing principles. There is a very large amount of the population that agrees with the fact that we need to do this and we need to do this urgently. However, the divisions are then met when we talk about the specific solutions. And that, I think, is much more complicated to address at the moment because it has already become politicized and polarized. And as Stefan clearly explained in his presentation, there are so many actors involved that it's very difficult to kind of stop the wheel when the wheel starts spinning. And as we have seen, I mean, the topic of climate change and policy wasn't as polarized a few years ago. Now this is completely different. Perhaps it will change. Perhaps we will encounter some of these crisis moments that we have seen may bring us around some more general principles again. But I guess that shall have to be seen.
Thanks. And I think we have time for one more quick answer, but just keep in mind you're between the people and their pizza, so no pressure. But anyway, yeah,
Okay.
she had a question over here. I work with energy transitions in the region of Trøndelag. What would be one recommendation from both of you? How do we communicate to generate public understanding on a local and regional scale?
Trust.
Yes, and trust.
If it is something you can visualize, something you can sell to the local newspaper or so, maybe you can go out as early as possible, and try to get the community to commit to the project, to be part of the project, rather than standing outside of it. But it's very vague, I agree.
I guess it also may be important to try and address any of the concerns that may arise with the things that you're trying to communicate, to be upfront about the weaknesses and the issues or the points that people or the opposition may attack. So try to be upfront about those to prevent any conflict to arise from it.
Thank you so much for that question. I think it was a really nice last question, but I believe it is 4 o'clock now. Yes. Okay. So I see that there are some more questions, but hope the chance now is to hang out and have some pizza and discuss some things further. But I'll let Benjamin tell us about the next seminar.
Exactly. So the next seminar will be about energy and AI. We already have 3 speakers, excellent speakers as today. So we hope to find you here again next week, next month. So it's the 30th of October, and the topic is energy and AI and data centers. Thank you.